Hello everybody, my name is Zekeriya Temircan from Kapadokya University, Department of Psychology. Today we have a very special guest from United States of America, and he is Professor Jeffrey Jensen Arnett from Clark University. And I have a lot to say about him, but I would like to give voice to him to introduce yourself for us. Hello sir, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. I am Jeffrey Jensen Arnett, and for the last 30 years, I've been studying the age period from 18 to 29 that I call emerging adulthood. And I've done a lot of research on that in the United States and also in Denmark. And I've collaborated with scholars all over the world, including in Turkey, as well as in China and South Korea and many places in Europe and also Chile in South America. And it's really an international field because all over the world the same patterns are happening. The people are staying in education longer and taking longer to make a transition to stable work, getting married later, having their first child later. So all over the world there's this new life stage that has opened up in between adolescence and a stable young adulthood. That's what I've been fascinated by for 30 years. And in proposing emerging adulthood, I wanted to draw the people's attention to it. And now it's become a thriving international research field with researchers all over the world.
That's great. So, Professor Arnett, let me start with this one. So right now, and by the way, we have a lot of good information about emerging adulthood because of you, which is great. And you published so many articles, you wrote so many books about this one. And as you are originator of emerging adulthood, and let me ask this question. How did you come up with this idea? How did you think that we do need emerging adulthood stage, right after adolescent period?
Well, 30 years ago, I became interested in interviewing people in their 20s. And the reason at the time was personal, that I had just passed my 20s, and I thought, what an interesting decade of life that was. Why doesn't anybody study this? We have a history in psychology, especially in my field of developmental psychology, of focusing on the early years of life, assuming that that's where everything important happens. Well, I'm not sure that was ever true. But I certainly don't think it's true today. A lot of important things happen in the 20s. And so developmental psychology had neglected any period past childhood and adolescence for a long time. And I thought, why don't I see what's happening in the 20s, start interviewing people, see what they have to say about their lives. And I didn't really have any ideas about it at the time. I just thought it would be interesting to do. But as I interviewed people, and I interviewed hundreds of people, a total of 300 people in the United States during the 1990s, I thought more and more about how to describe them. Okay, I'm learning a lot about what life is like in the 20s, but who are they? What are they? They didn't seem like adolescents. I had been studying adolescents before that. They clearly were not adolescents. They're not going through puberty. They're not minors under the law. They're not dependents of their parents. Doesn't make any sense to call this an extended adolescence.
That's right.
But it wasn't a full adulthood either. And interestingly, when I asked them, do you feel like you've reached adulthood? Most of them didn't say yes or no. They said, well, in some ways I am. In some ways, yes. And in some ways, no. And they would tell me, in these ways, I feel like I am an adult. In other ways, I feel I'm not. So that's how I came up with the term emerging adulthood, because that's how they describe themselves, on the way to adulthood, but not there yet. And so I felt it was time to recognize that because people were marrying later, having their first child later, staying in education longer, taking longer to enter stable work, we needed a term for this new life stage in between adolescence and young adulthood. I decided to call it emerging adulthood. And that's a term that people have really resonated with all around the world. And I've found from hearing from many emerging adults in my own country and everywhere I've traveled to talk about emerging adulthood, the young people themselves really resonate with it. They say to me, thank you for helping me understand where I am. Because I don't feel like an adolescent anymore, but I don't really feel fully adult. Emerging adulthood makes them feel like it's okay that it's taking longer for them to reach adulthood. It does take longer these days. And emerging adults sometimes feel like they're behind because they know where their parents were at this time of life. Their parents entered all these transitions earlier. So they sometimes feel behind. And they feel relieved when I describe how things are today. They realize that they're not really behind if they're taking through most of their 20s to develop a stable adult life. That's what's normal today.
That is great, and thank you for the long explanation. So people, they understand, I mean, those age area, they understand where they belong to. That is your explanation. So in your talk and in your studies, and we see that, and you also giving more attention about the cultural variation, and you also and concentration on culture, different aspect of culture for emerging adulthood, which is appreciated, because you have great observation, great experience about different culture. That way, you compare, I mean, different countries, different community, different people. That way, and under the emerging adulthood umbrella, and it is very important for people to take some pieces for their community. And I would like to learn about your experience about cultural variation for emerging adulthood, because there are many differences, many similarities as well for the communities, for the countries. And as though Americans and Europeans are same, as though Turkish people and Middle Eastern people are same, as though Middle Easterns and Arab communities are same. Do you think they are same or not?
Oh, of course not. I think we all know that from our experience. I'm a developmental psychologist, but I'm also a cultural psychologist. And that means I always think of development as it takes place in a culture, and in terms of cultural variations. So when I first presented the idea of emerging adulthood, even though I had only studied Americans at the time, I wrote about how what was really going to be fascinating and fun was to see all the variations that might be taking place and how this is experienced around the world. So there are certain things that are the same. So all over the world, this demographic pattern has happened where people are staying in education longer, taking longer to enter work, taking longer to get married, later to have their first child. That's true all over the world. So that's something that is common in all of our countries and cultures. But what happens during that time really is different. And it depends on cultural variations such as, what is the economy like?
Right.
So is it mainly a knowledge and information economy where you're going to be learning to use information in various ways? Doing research is an example.
Right.
Working for a technology company is an example. Being a writer of some kind is an example. Those are all knowledge professions. So is the economy based mainly on those kinds of professions, or is it still based on manufacturing? For example, I have a student in China who did research on young women there who migrated from their poor farms in rural areas into the urban areas to work in factories. In China, that's happening a lot because they have mainly a manufacturing economy right now. But in most of Europe, I think in Turkey too, you've moved more towards an information economy. Right. You still have manufacturing, you still have agriculture, probably more agriculture than we have in the United States. But it's mainly a manufacturing economy. And that makes a big difference. It's mainly an information and knowledge economy. And that makes a big difference for how emerging adulthood is experienced. These young women in China that my student Juan Zhang studied. I think they're emerging adults because they also are taking longer to enter adult milestones. But they have a different kind of emerging adulthood than we have in the United States or than you have in most of Europe. Another important variation is in how people view sexuality and premarital sexuality. So some places that's acceptable now because people marry so late. They marry around age 30, and many of them don't want to wait until then to begin an active sex life. So in a lot of societies, especially in North America and Europe, it's become acceptable to have premarital sex and also even to cohabit, to live with a partner before marriage. But in other countries, including I think Turkey and most of Asia, China, Vietnam, Thailand, South America too. Chile, I mentioned, is a place where I've collaborated on research. It's not acceptable. In fact, premarital sex is not really acceptable. That doesn't mean it never happens, but there's a cultural prohibition against it. That's important. And then a third thing that I think is an important marker of cultural variation is how much obligation you still have to your parents and to your family. So is it okay to still live with your family, or are you supposed to become independent? Well, that varies a lot across countries, and it makes a big difference in how you experience emerging adulthood. Whether you're living at home, you're still expected to have dinner with your family and take care of your younger siblings. That's a much different emerging adulthood than if you move out at 18 or 19 and you're really not supposed to come back because independence is valued. And you're supposed to show that you can be an independent adult before you become an adult yourself. I think that at the heart of it is this question of how emerging adult is supposed to be experienced. Is it supposed to be an independent adventure where you're supposed to show that you can stand on your own? You can learn to be a self-sufficient person. You don't need your family. You don't contribute to them economically, and you also don't rely on them economically anymore. Or are you still in emerging adulthood expected to have obligations to your family, be respectful to your parents, live with them until you are married? That makes a big difference in how emerging adulthood is experienced. And I think that's one of the fascinating things to learn more about in this new field.
But thank you. When you look at from different perspectives for cultural variation, we have so many examples in the world. Do you think, for this adolescence with technology, education, and do you think these variations are going to help emerging adulthood, or it is just going to support for adolescents to have a better life?
Well,
because there are so many differences, because tradition and culture, they are still playing a very important role for some countries, for some people. And when you talk about, the independency, and when you talk about the financial independency or other things that they are, surrounding people life, and they don't decide by themselves for their marriage, for their education, for their job. But it is not really easy for them to decide.
That's true.
And that way, although they are periodically in emerging adulthood, but mentally they are not.
Well, that is true. And it is a big challenge to make a life for yourself. If you think of how people lived in the past, people didn't have much individual choice, did they? I mean, in our societies, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 or 1,000 years ago, there wasn't much individual choice. You grew up in a family, you had certain expectations because you were a boy or a girl, or because you were from a poor family or a wealthy family, or because you lived in a rural village or you lived in an urban area. You had all these expectations, and you didn't have much freedom to decide because you had to grow up and you had to work to help your family, and then you got married by the time you were around 20 years old, and then you had a family of your own, and you did the same kind of work your parents did, very likely, right? Because that was the only work you knew how to do. Well, today, in our advanced economies that rely on information and knowledge, there's so many different things you could do, right? The range of different possible occupations in a knowledge economy is almost infinite because there's so many different ways to use knowledge, and new ideas are coming along all the time and new possibilities. You know, take information technology, the phones that we rely on so much and carry around all day and use for so many different purposes. Millions of people work in jobs now, designing those phones, making those phones, providing the content for those phones. Millions of people around the world. That did not exist 20 years ago. Isn't it amazing to think?
Definitely.
It's less than 20 years since the first iPhone. And so all of this exists when it didn't exist before. That's one example among many of how you have this economy that's so complex and so diverse. It's wonderful because you can find a place to use your own particular talents. It's great that you have the opportunity to choose your own occupation, but it's also can be confusing and overwhelming because there's so many possibilities. And everybody's telling you, oh, you get to choose. It's up to you. But you may be thinking, I have no idea
what to choose then.
It's too much. And so I think there are both sides of it. It's wonderful to have opportunities. And for young men, and especially young women in the last 50 years, the range of their opportunities has just grown so much. And they thrive on it mostly.
That's right.
But there can be a period there that, like my own 23-year-old daughter is experiencing right now. Extremely talented, very ambitious, but doesn't know exactly for what. And so she's confused, and she sometimes feels lost and feels like she really wishes she could find that one thing that she's really going to want to do. She doesn't have that yet. And I keep telling her, you're only 23. Today, you don't have to decide at 23. It may be 24, 25, 27, 28. But she will figure it out. Almost everybody does by the end of their 20s.
That's great. Thank you. So we are hosting you because of our conferences as well. So as Kapadokya University, we are holding second International Adolescents and Youth and Research Congress. You are one of our, you are keynote speaker, and we have other speakers as well. I really would like to know about your experience about the Congress. How did you find?
Well, I've enjoyed it greatly. This is my second visit to Turkey. And both times, what has really impressed me and what I will take with me when I go is the warmth, the hospitality, the generosity of the people. It's really distinctive, it's remarkable, and it's special about being in Turkey. And I love being here. My wife and I have been treated extremely well. We thank you for inviting us because it's been a great experience. And I've had so many interesting conversations with people in just 2 days about Turkey, that people are thinking about Turkey and what they want it to be and how it's changed in recent years and the challenges it's facing now in its economy and its reconciling the different views that people have of what Turkey should be. People are thinking about that and they're talking about that, and it's really interesting to hear about. And the emerging adults that I'm talking to are all thinking about it too and wondering what it's going to be like. And so for me, as a researcher on emerging adulthood, I'm thinking this is a great opportunity to talk to emerging adults now and listen to them. What are they having to say about what they want their own lives to be and where they see their society going, where they want it to go? There's some great questions there that your young researchers are beginning to answer. I had a meeting with 3 young women today who are doing research on emerging adults, and I was telling them, this is a real opportunity. This moment it's an important moment for Turkey's history and future. And as a researcher, you should really take advantage of this. Learn about what young Turkish people are saying about their society and where they want it to go.
Thank you very much. Your contribution was very, very important and valuable for us too. And there are many participants in the Congress, and they definitely take an advantage from you and your observation, your experience, and your presentation. And on behalf of our university and my department, my Congress people, I really would like to extend my gratitude and appreciation to you. And you came from all the way from United States to Turkey and shared your great, the research and experience and everything, and which is unexpressible for us too. And the second thing, I'm sure that it is first time for you. You are visiting Kapadokya University here. And how did you find our university?
I find it very welcoming. I think it's beautiful, all these sandstone buildings, and the whole area is quite fascinating. I've never seen anything like it geographically. The stones, the natural monuments that are unlike anywhere else. Pink and light brown and white and all these different colors that have been shaped over thousands of years by the wind and the rain. It's really an amazing place.
Isn't it impressive?
It's very impressive, and I've enjoyed looking at the underground cities and the old churches from hundreds, actually a couple of thousands of years ago that they built right into the rock. That was fascinating to see.
Right.
And I honestly have really enjoyed the call of the imam at 5:30 in the morning when the sun comes up. It's such a different thing for somebody who lives in the U.S. to have that sort of rhythm to daily life. And again, I'm a cultural psychologist. I am fascinated by the different ways that we as peoples have invented to understand life and to make sense of it and to structure of it. And so coming to Turkey makes me think about all these things in some new ways.
That's great. Thank you so much. Would you like to add some more? And it's a great conversation, and it is a wonderful time, with you. But we are finishing our interview. Would you like to add some more?
I would just like to say thank you to you, to your colleagues, to all the Turkish people I've met here. Again, the warmth, the hospitality, the generosity is really special and memorable, and we have really enjoyed being here. We hope to come back.
Thank you so much. We are finishing our interview with Professor Arnett from Clark University from United States. And once again, I would like to thank to him and his wife and participating in our conferences as a special guest. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.